Barbara. Hi, everybody. As Barbara mentioned, I'm Ira Weinreb. I'm the 31st District Treasurer, ending up my first year in the two-year term. All of the council and district terms are 2 years, unlike your term in the units, which is 1 year. So you'll see me again throughout the course of the next year. I've been doing this PTA stuff for a long time, 8 years now. I've been the unit treasurer in units at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. I was the council treasurer at the Northwest Valley Council for 2 years before this, and now the district treasurer. So I've seen a lot of stuff, and one of the main things that I want to communicate in these trainings is that you are not alone. We are here for you. Much of my job as a district treasurer and much of the council treasurer's jobs is being here to assist you all. So if you have questions as you go, something comes along, you get a letter from the IRS, anything like that, please reach out to me for help. That's what we're here for. And I'm gonna, let's see, here's my contact information right here. My email address, I prefer email because that way I can think about your question, I can research it if I need to, and I can respond, you know, clearly in writing and provide links and attachments and whatever might be necessary for the question. But if you don't like email or you're more comfortable with a telephone conversation or a text, that's okay too. So this is my cell phone number right here. Please feel free to contact me if you have questions, not just today, but just during your entire time as a unit treasurer. That's one of the main advantages to being part of a PTA or PTSA is that institutional support. You know, you're part of a much larger organization as opposed to a PTO in which you're just out there all by yourself, left to, you know, figure things out. So we are here for you. So these are the council treasurers, and we'll talk about this in just a second, but every unit, which is what we call the school level PTA or PTSA, every unit is part of a council, which is the level immediately above the units. There's 6 councils in the 31st District PTSA, which is what we are, and these are the 6 council treasurers. If you're not sure which council your unit is a part of, look at the first page of your bylaws. It will say, in addition to a bunch of other useful information, it will say what council you're a part of. Your unit is a part of one of these 6 councils. And these treasurers, their phone numbers, and their email addresses are also available for assistance. You'll also be providing various things to them during the course of the year, money, documents, you know, those sorts of things. And they'll be giving you information as we go as well. So you may be wondering, what exactly is it that unit treasurers do? So this is the broad strokes, your 5 main areas of tasks that you're responsible for as a unit treasurer. You receive money for the unit. All the money that comes into the unit basically passes through your hands. Now, if you have a financial secretary in your unit, some units do, most don't. That'll be specified in your bylaws. But if you do, they act as kind of an assistant to the treasurer, and they're responsible primarily for receiving money for the unit. So they might be the ones, if you have a financial secretary, that actually handle the money coming in, and then they give paperwork to you, letting you know what was received. But for most of you who won't have a financial secretary, you do that. In addition to that, you also make disbursements of money for the unit. So this is the outgoing money. You write checks, you pay bills. You are responsible for keeping accurate books of the unit's finances. And there's a variety of ways to do that, and we'll be talking about that later. You are also responsible for making various reports regarding the unit's finances. At every board meeting, at every association meeting, you're required to provide a treasurer's report, letting the attendees of the meeting know a snapshot of the state of the unit's finances. In addition to that, there's some annual reports that you'll be responsible for doing as well. And you're also responsible for compliance with government and PTA rules. Now, actually, all PTA board members are responsible to some extent for compliance with government and PTA rules. But the treasurer really does get a big chunk of that responsibility put on their shoulders. And we're going to talk about that as well. So when we talk about PTA channels, channels are just the different levels of PTA. So starting at the top, we have the national PTA. Then we have a state level PTA in all 50 states, as well as a couple more covering some international situations. American schools for U.S. service men and women, you know, things like that. They are represented by PTAs as well. Then each state is divided up into multiple districts. In California, where we have the California State PTA, there are, I believe, 29 districts currently. We are the 31st district. The reason we're numbered 31, and there's actually a few numbers even higher than that when there's only 29, is that some of the numbers have been discontinued over time. Sometimes districts are merged into one, they're split into two, that sort of thing. Then, as I already mentioned, the 31st district is divided into 6 councils, and then each council generally has roughly 20 units, except one of our councils only has roughly 10 units. Altogether, we have about 109 units in the 31st district PTSA. When you're required to pay money or provide documents through channels, which is how it'll be worded, you generally only submit them to the immediately higher level. So you all, when you have to pay, for instance, per capita membership dues to the higher levels, and we'll be talking about that, you only pay that money to the council treasurer. So you write one check to your council, you deliver it to your council treasurer, and then they do the same thing. They keep their portion, and then they pass everything else on to us, the 31st district. We keep our portion and pass everything on, you know, up to the state, and the state keeps its portion and passes the national share on to them. So you're not sending separate checks to the national, state, and district PTA. You just give everything to the council. Okay, these are the things that you should be doing next month. So you probably know, and if you don't, you know now, that the PTAs run on a fiscal year that goes from July 1st through June 30th. So right now, we're just finishing up at the end of this month, the current fiscal year. And then the new fiscal year will start on July 1st, along with all of your terms of office, unless you're carrying over from the current year. So the new terms begin on July 1st. And that's when the new fiscal year starts as well. So these are the things that you should be doing as soon as possible in July. You can't do it yet. You will need to change the bank account signers. So each unit will typically have 3 authorized check signers on your bank account. Those positions are specified in your bylaws. So actually, let me talk just for a second about bylaws. So bylaws are your governing document. They're like your particular unit's constitution. They govern the rules of your existence and how you're supposed to operate. To a large extent, they're standardized. So each unit typically has mostly the same stuff in their bylaws, although there's numerous places where there were blanks and particular information unique to your unit was filled in. So you need to make sure that you get a copy of your bylaws and that you familiarize yourself with them. And that is critically important. Your bylaws will answer a variety of questions for you, including how much does it cost to join as a member, because you can't charge memberships that are different than what it says in your bylaws, with one small exception that we'll talk about in a bit. Your bylaws will specify how many people need to be present at an association meeting or at a board meeting in order to legally transact business. That's called your quorum requirement. If you don't have that many people present, you can't do anything. Your bylaws will specify who your check signers are. The check signers are generally the president, the treasurer, and one other person, sometimes 2 other people. It depends. So all of those things are specific to each unit, and that's why you need to familiarize yourself with your bylaws. The 3rd check signer is usually, but not always, your executive vice president, if you have one. Not all units do. Or your 1st vice president, if you don't have an executive vice president. But again, it can vary. But there are some rules about who your check signers cannot be, and that includes your secretary and your auditor. So those positions are barred from being signers on the bank account. So once you figure out who your check signers are supposed to be according to your bylaws, you will take a copy of the meeting minutes from your election meeting, naming who was elected to those positions, to your bank in order to get the new check signers added onto the bank account effective for the new year. You'll do that at some point on or after July 1st. You should make an appointment. That'll make it go faster. Your bank will undoubtedly require 2 forms of ID for each person. So typically that'd be something like a driver's license and a credit card, an ATM card, a debit card, something like that. But you can check with your bank to see what their particular requirements are so that you don't go down there only to discover that you're missing something important. In the last few years, most banks have started requiring an existing check signer to accompany the new check signers. So if one of the new check signers is not really new, but is an existing check signer, for instance, at my own unit, where I'm also, well, this year I'm the treasurer at Granada Hills Charter High School, in addition to being the district treasurer, and I'm also the president-elect. On July 1st, I'll be the president of the Granada High School PTSA. So I'm already a check signer on our bank account because I was the treasurer this past year, and I'll continue to be a signer next year as the president. So I will count as somebody who's an existing check signer, and I only need to bring with me the 2 new check signers, the new treasurer and our new first vice president. So the 3 of us will go to the bank. But if all 3 of us are new to being a signer on the bank account, then we would also need to bring one of the, at that time, old check signers as well, so that because the bank is already familiar with this year's check signers, and that person can verify to the bank, yes, these 3 other people over here are actually the new people that are authorized to be on the account. Didn't used to be that way years ago. The 3 new people could just show up, but nowadays, pretty much you need to bring an old person if one of the new people is not also an old person. You will want to receive the books from the prior treasurer. So typically, and hopefully this will be the case for all of you, there'll be a smooth transition from the old treasurer to you as the new treasurer, and the old treasurer will meet with you. That's always what I've done whenever I've been the outgoing treasurer. I make an appointment with the incoming treasurer. I have them come over to my house, and I spend an hour or an hour and a half explaining things to them. I can show them the stuff on my computer, all the ways that I've done things. I can show them exactly, you know, what things look like and how to do it. And then they leave with a bunch of party favors, which is all the books. Now that will involve a variety of things. You'll get the checkbook. You'll get the books and records from, you know, the prior year, and oftentimes the prior years. Some units are fortunate in that they have storage space at their school where they can keep the historical records. Many units are not that fortunate, and there is no storage space for the PTA at their school. A lot of times the space is at a premium at schools. So if you don't have storage space at the school, then typically the treasurer becomes the repository of all of the old financial records. So it's been very common for me, you know, that as I become the incoming treasurer at a unit, I collect boxes and boxes, and sometimes in boxes and boxes and boxes of old records from the old treasurer, and then I stick them in my closet. And oftentimes I don't look at them again for a year or 2 years. And then when I'm turning the stuff over to my successor, I unload all that stuff onto them, as well as the stuff I generated during my term as treasurer. Sometimes, unfortunately, the transition is not that smooth. Sometimes the treasurer leaves in a huff. They had some sort of personality, you know, conflicts with the other members of the board. Sometimes they just basically disappear. That's unfortunate. Because if they don't turn over the records to you, it makes your job much harder, especially when you get a letter from the IRS, for instance, that says, hey, you never filed your tax return for the 2012-2013 fiscal year. And then, good luck trying to deal with that if you don't have the old records that you can go back to. And that kind of stuff does happen, where the government sends a letter, saying they're missing something from years and years past. That's always unfortunate when that happens. But it's much easier if you have, or even better, as we're going to talk about later, if all those records have been uploaded to PTSA, because then you can just access them online without having to store multiple boxes of crud in your closet. Because fortunately, my closet's pretty big. I've got an office here, and I've got a big walk-in closet in my office, so storage space isn't that much of a problem, but that may or may not be the case for all of you. Then it goes in your garage or the backyard or wherever you can, find space for it. So you'll get stamps for, endorsing your checks. You'll get deposit slips. You'll get a variety of goodies from your predecessor. You also want to make sure that you get online access to everything that you need online access to from your predecessor. That would include your bank account so that you can look online and check transactions, look up, print out copies of checks, get your bank statements, all that kind of stuff. Your predecessor should set that up for you. You'll want to make sure you have access to Totem, which is the California State Electronic Membership System that we're going to talk more about as well as online access to PTSA, which we'll also talk more about. You want to make sure that your unit is active on Totem. So as I mentioned, Totem is the electronic membership system. It lets your prospective members join from the website, basically, or their phone. They pay with a credit or debit card, and it makes life much easier for you on many different levels, and we'll talk more about Totem later. But the important thing to know is that we really want every single unit to be active on Totem this year. In fact, we wanted it for this past year as well, and we actually got most of the units successfully active on Totem. But we want 100% of units signed up for Totem this year. So you should find out if your unit is one of them. If you're signed up so that people can join your unit electronically like that, great. If you're not, get that done. It's very easy, and we're going to talk more about that later. Out of our 109 units in the 31st district, we have, I think, about 15 or so that are still not on Totem, and 95 or whatever that are. So make sure your unit is good to go. Read your bylaws. We talked about that. Then there's going to be some end of the year stuff right here. There's the 2019-20 annual financial report. That's basically an annual summary of your unit's finances for the year that's going to be ending at the end of June. The 2019-20 end of the year audit, which is a review making sure that things were done properly. And then you'll be preparing the 2020-21 annual budget. Now, technically, the 2019-20 annual financial report and the 2019-20 end of the year audits should be done by others. The annual financial report should be done by the outgoing treasurer. Also the taxes, which we'll talk more about, should be done by the outgoing treasurer. So in theory, you shouldn't have to worry about that as the incoming treasurer, except to make sure that it's done. However, if you're in one of those situations where your outgoing treasurer has left in a huff, they may well say, well, that's nice that I'm supposed to do this, but I'm not doing it. I'm out of here. So I've already moved to Texas or whatever. So if that happens, then you need to do it, because at the bottom line is it needs to get done. But it should be the outgoing treasurer that's the one doing it. And the budget, however, you'll be doing. Generally, you want the current year annual financial report to be done first, because then the budget is basically just like the financial report. You take the old financial report and you tinker it around a little bit for what you think is going to be different in the upcoming year, and voila, that's your budget. Now, of course, because of the whole virus situation, things are very different, than they were in the past. Usually, for PTAs, each year is pretty much like the prior year. You know, we tend to be creatures of habit, things, you know, the same kinds of fundraisers and events that, you know, seem to happen each year. You know, they're successful, you have a history at your school, the parents expect them, so you generally tend to do the same events each year. That may not be possible in the upcoming year. So, you know, doing the budgets may require more thinking to see, you know, about what is going to be feasible to do in the upcoming year and what isn't, and, you know, how that's going to impact your finances. Raffles, just a quick word on raffles, because raffles are dying out. The LAUSD typically frowns on raffles. And in fact, they often won't approve raffles anymore, especially if they're going to be done on campus. But it still may be pertinent to you for a few reasons. First of all, if you're an independent charter, then you're not governed by the LAUSD rules on that, and they don't have to approve it. So, for instance, my own high school, Granada Hills Charter High School, is an independent charter. So we do a raffle every year as part of our fundraising high tea. So that's certainly something that's pertinent to us. In addition, if you do a raffle off campus, and you may or may not be able to do that, you know, without the LAUSD being enthusiastic about that. That'll depend on your principal. So your principal may allow it, your principal may not allow it. So that's something that, you know, you'll find out. But the important thing to remember is that the 2019-20 raffle report has to be done if you had a raffle during the 2019-20 year, or if you registered to do a raffle for the 2019-20 year, even if you never actually held the raffle. So if your predecessor filed a raffle application for 2019-20 and then the virus hit, the school shut down, and you never held the raffle, you still need to submit the raffle report for last year, which will basically say, yeah, we were going to have a raffle, but we didn't. And that's fine. But if you don't submit that, then the Attorney General's office will think you're delinquent, because they had no way of knowing whether or not you actually held a raffle. All they know is that you registered to hold a raffle, and they're expecting to see a raffle report. So find out if you registered last year for a raffle, and if so, make sure you do the raffle report, and we'll talk about that a smidgen more later. So this is what your annual budget might look like. This is a sample form, and have a few things to say in general here. First of all, I emailed all of you, everyone who registered for this training, I emailed you all a set of handouts of this training, as well as an outline of this training. Those handouts contain these sorts of documents. So you'll be able to look at that, you know, it's a PDF, you'll be able to look at that, and that will be helpful for you as you go. These documents also came, as you can see, from the California State PTA Toolkit, which is something that you should familiarize yourself with. The toolkit is a very long, roughly 350-page how-to book for running a PTA, basically. So it's divided up into chapters. Different chapters may be of more interest to different officers. So several of the chapters are going to be primarily of interest to the presidents. But two of the chapters, Chapter 5 on finance, as well as the chapter on forms, which contains all these forms, will be of quite a bit of interest to you as treasurers. So you should familiarize yourself with at least the finance section and the forms section of the PTA Toolkit. You can find that on the state PTA website, the address of which is CA for California, PTA.org. And you go there, and then under running your PTA, you'll see there's a menu choice for the toolkit, and you can either look at it online, or you can download either the entire thing, which is enormous, or chapter by chapter, the chapters that pertain to you. You can download that right to your computer, so you'll have it available for future reference. Okay. Now, with respect to these kinds of forms, almost always these forms are just samples. In fact, this even says that, budget, sample. They're not mandatory that you use this exact form or that you keep it in this exact format. This is just the state PTA's way of saying, here's a form that you can use as a starting point. You may find for your unit, you want to make some modifications and such to the forms, and that's perfectly acceptable. And in fact, I myself have modified some of the forms. For instance, on the budget, as well as the annual financial report, I like to present, like for fundraisers, the revenue, and then next to that, the expenses of that fundraiser, so that you can see what the profit is on a fundraiser by fundraiser basis. Whereas this, you know, basically lumps stuff together and has your revenue at the top and then your expenses down here. So, but whatever works for you generally is fine as long as you present this information. And yes, many, though not all, of the forms are fillable PDFs, and you can download those from the state website. So that, you know, that will come in handy. And they're working on creating more fillable PDFs as well. Okay. So let's talk about receiving money for the unit, which is the first of the 5 main responsibilities of treasurers. So when you receive money for the unit, there's a cash verification form, which needs to be filled out every time money is generated from some activity for the PTA. So yes, you can absolutely create your own forms in Excel. That's perfectly fine. Not a bad idea to look at the samples in the toolkit to make sure that you're including everything in your form that's necessary as, you know, as a guide. But yes, you can create your own forms in Excel, and in fact, that's, you know, what I've done in the units where I've been. Things like the budget versus actual, and the annual financial report are Excel spreadsheets that I created for my units. So back to receiving money for the unit, you'll fill out a cash verification form, which is this form right here. Now, you may notice that this form is actually dated 2011. So it came from the toolkit, but back, you know, 9 years ago. There have been several subsequent modifications of this form in the intervening years. So why am I using the 2011 version here? Well, honestly, I like this version the best. The subsequent versions I don't find to be quite as useful for me. So I continue to use this 2011 version in my units. Now, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you won't have a different opinion, or that in your unit you won't think that the later forms are better. So you can look at the current version of the form in the current toolkit on the CAPTA website, and you can make up your own mind whether or not you want to use this version, the new version, or your own modified version as well. But in any event, whenever you have an event, you will fill out this form or one pretty close to it. You know, you'll put the unit name and the activity. So what was this money for? Membership, a fundraiser, your movie night, donations, whatever it is. You'll typically have a separate form for each thing, for each activity. And then you'll fill it out. So you'll have your coins, your currency, your checks listed, as well as totals. There's this box right here only applies for membership. So you just fill this out when you're dealing with membership, but it's pretty handy. So you would say that you receive 100 members, for instance, at $10 a member would be $1,000. And then oftentimes you'll collect some donation along with the membership. People will round it off. They'll say, here, keep the change, whatever. Maybe your membership is $8 and they'll give you a $10 bill. So then you would list, you know, $2 of donations or whatever it is, and then the grand total. Then down at the bottom, there's space for signatures. Okay, you need to have 2 people count money whenever you receive money. That's to protect the association, and it's also to protect you, so that you're not the only one handling the money. And then whoever counts the money should be signing that cash verification form, so you have a record of who counted the money. And each person who counts the money, once you filled out the cash verification form, you should take a picture of it so that you have a record of what was counted and what you signed as having been there for that particular event. That also gives you some accountability, so that when you're at your next association meeting and the treasurer presents a treasurer's report saying that the movie night last month, collected $1,000 in revenue. And if you're one of the people who counted the money and you say, wait a minute, I remember counting $1,400, what's going on? And then you would, ask more questions about why it is that the treasurer's report didn't match with what you counted. You need to carefully safeguard all the money that you collect, of course. You should deposit it promptly into the bank and safeguard it carefully until you do. Now, what constitutes promptly? Well, that depends. It varies based on the circumstances. Generally, the more money you're talking about, the more promptly you should be depositing the money. If you collect, one membership from somebody, you're at an association meeting and somebody hands you $8 and says, I need a membership, for myself. I never got around to paying earlier in the year. That's great. That's $8. Does that mean you need to drop everything and immediately speed over to the bank to deposit $8? No, not necessarily, and not really. On the other hand, the other end of the extreme, at my unit, Granada, the high school, when we sell grad night tickets, that generates an enormous amount of money. It's all cash because we only accept cash for that. And because it's an expensive event and we have a huge, student population, it's not at all uncommon that just in one day of selling tickets, and we sell tickets for, about 10 days, but on the busiest day, for instance, I might have $40,000 in cash. That kind of money, requires different, procedures basically than the $8 of membership money. You can bet your bottom dollar that on the grad night ticket sales, when I'm sitting there with $40,000 in cash, that money goes directly from the school to our bank. And I don't even take it by myself. I bring somebody else who was selling tickets with me along to the bank with me, because I want two of us so that A, it's more deterrent from getting robbed, and B, that if heaven forbid I do get robbed, I want a witness over what happened. I don't want to be saying, oh yeah, somebody took the money and I'm the only one who saw that happen, but you can believe me. Sorry about that. That obviously, would be an enormous disaster if something like that happened. It might even be possible, depending on the circumstances, where you might even have, a police officer accompany you to the bank. If you have a daytime event, a lot of times there's a school resource officer who might be willing to take you to the bank or go with you to the bank. Or they might not, it depends. But different circumstances, different procedures apply depending on what the circumstances are, and what help is available to you to safeguard that money and how much money it is. The official PTA, state PTA pronouncement is that you should never take PTA money home with you. So I'm telling you, that's what the state PTA's opinion is. But that sometimes simply is not practical. It just depends. You might have an evening event. At my elementary school, we used to have a lot of evening movie nights. Banks closed, long since closed by the time the movie night's over. So I can't just take it to the bank at the end of the movie night. So what do you do with the money? Well, there's a few possibilities. Every school has a safe. It's typically in the student store for a middle school or a high school, and it's typically in the main office for an elementary school. There's usually only a couple of people at the school that have access to the safe, the financial manager in a middle school or high school, the SAS in an elementary school, the principal. And the school may allow you to store money in their safe for a short period of time, overnight, something like that, before you can take it to the bank. If that sort of situation is acceptable to the school, the way that would work is you would count the money after your event. The two people would count the money, fill out the cash verification form, take pictures of it, seal it up in an envelope, and then just stick that sealed envelope into the safe so that nobody who has access to the safe can remove any of the money from the envelope without having to rip the envelope open. And then you would, go back the next day and, take that to the bank. LAUSD generally frowns on that. A lot of schools don't like it because they don't want to be responsible. Frankly, they're not really going to be responsible. So if something did happen, they're going to say sorry, but they're not going to make it good. most likely. But even so, typically a lot of schools will say, no, no, that's our safe. You cannot store stuff in our safe. But a lot of other schools will let you do that. So it really just totally depends on your principal. And oftentimes what's been done in the past. You know, schools that have allowed it in the past will generally tend to keep allowing it, at least unless they get a new principal or something who has a different view. Schools that don't allow it typically will continue to not allow it. So that's something that you can find out from your school. Some units have their own safe located at the school. Well, my middle school did, for instance, and actually so did the elementary school. So how exactly does that work? Well, they may allow you to have a safe there. If you have dedicated space, like a PTA room or a PTA closet at the school, you know, then you might be able to keep a safe in your own space. Or even if you don't, they still might let you keep a safe in the office. For instance, you know, at my middle school, off of the principal's own office, there was a utility room that was used for electronics. The phone lines and stuff ran through there, computer servers, things like that, and they allowed the PTA to keep a PTA safe in that room so that we could only access it when the principal was, you know, in his office, basically, but it was our own safe. The school did not have the combination to our safe, only the PTA people did. PTA president, PTA treasurer had the combination to the PTA safe. So how secure is that? Well, again, that depends. How good is that safe? You know, if it's the, you know, the safe that you buy at Office Depot for $50, it's sort of secure. It's not super great. And is the safe actually bolted down to the floor? Is, you know, the key question. If you just have a small, lightweight safe that's sitting on a bookshelf, that's not secure at all. Anybody could just steal the whole safe and then be able to break into it at their leisure. But if you properly mount the safe to the floor, you know, bolt it down to the floor, or, you know, bolt it down to built-in, you know, very sturdy, you know, apparatus, you know, then that might be fairly safe, especially if it's a decent quality safe. So it varies. If you have a, you know, a commercial grade safe that's bolted to the floor, then that's safe for storing thousands of dollars. If you have a cheapo safe from, you know, Office Max that you, you know, bolted to a bookshelf, but that's it, that's sort of safe for, you know, maybe storing a couple of $100, but I wouldn't want to store, you know, vast sums in there, and I wouldn't want to store any money in there for very long. So it really depends, you know, but, you know, we've had some units that, you know, store a bunch of cash in the, you know, file cabinet drawer in the office. That's horrible. Don't do that. You know, in fact, one unit, you know, that had, you know, the membership money for the year, basically, and this was like in January or something. They had all the membership money. They hadn't even gotten around to counting it or dealing with it yet. So they just took all the individual membership envelopes from the parents and tossed it into a file cabinet. Horrible. Don't do that. You know, not secure at all. You'd have no way of knowing, you know, what disappeared. You know, that is not safeguarding the money, you know, and I'm sure it should be obvious to all of you that that's not safeguarding the money. When you get money in, count it promptly, and then deal with it in an appropriate manner. Never commingle the money. That means you can't mix the PTA money with non-PTA money. Never deposit money of other groups into the PTA account. So when the 5th grade committee, you know, says, hey, we got a bunch of money, can you stick it in your bank account and give it back to us later? The answer is no. Under no circumstances can you do that. The IRS, you know, laws basically say that any money that winds up in the bank account of a nonprofit is that nonprofit's money. And you're responsible for reporting it. You're responsible for including it in your taxes. You're responsible for, you know, spending it in a, you know, legally approved manner. So you cannot deposit money for any other group in the PTA account. If the 5th grade committee, you know, in a lot of elementary schools, there will be some sort of symbiotic relationship between the 5th grade committee and the PTA. But if that's going to be the case for you, then basically those 5th grade events are going to be PTA events that the PTA is going to be responsible for, and needs to comply with all the PTA requirements for, you know, approving the expenditure of those funds, dealing with the insurance requirements, all of that kind of thing. You cannot just act as the bank for some other group. Do not put PTA money in your personal account. So you can't just take all the proceeds from your movie night and deposit it into your personal account and then write a personal check to the PTA for the proceeds. That's commingling. You can't do it. Don't put PTA money in the school account. You know, that you can't do that either, because the school account is for the school's money. The PTA's money is the PTA's money, and you can't mix those together. Okay. So membership money. So when you receive cash or checks for memberships, or if your unit accepts PayPal or credit cards using PayPal or Square or one of the other vendors, you know, for memberships, that's fine. When you receive the money directly as a unit, then you need to properly account for all of that membership money. That's separate and distinct from the electronic memberships that are sold for your unit through Totem. Okay, so these are two totally different things. We're going to talk about the traditional style memberships where you're getting the money directly, and then we're going to talk about Totem where people are joining directly on the Totem site and then they're handling the money for you. So membership dues, the amount of membership dues that a unit may charge is set forth in your bylaws, okay? So you need to know what that amount is. Typically, the most common amount right now for membership dues in the 31st District is kind of split between $8 and $10. It used to be $8 most units were charging. You know, in the last year or two, more units have been going to 10. So those are the two most common dues amounts, but that doesn't matter. The only thing that matters to you is what are your dues amounts, and that's what it says in your bylaws, okay? It might be as much as 10 or 12. I think there might even be 1 or 2 units that are charging like 15, which is a lot of money, but if your demographics are such that that's appropriate, you know, that's up to your unit as long as that's included in your bylaws. On the other end, it might be 8, 7, 6. Hopefully it's not 6 anymore, but we did have some units that were still charging 6, but 6 is very problematic for the reason that we're going to talk about in just a second here. So hopefully you're charging at least 7, preferably 8 in all your units. But again, it goes by what it says in your bylaws. If your bylaws say 6, or if your bylaw, regardless of what your bylaws say, if you want to change it, the way that you do that is you have to amend your bylaws in order to change the membership dues specified in your bylaws. And that's a whole procedure, and it takes a long time. So if your dues are currently set pretty low and you think you're going to want to be raising your dues, then you'll need to start that whole process for amending your bylaws, and you cannot charge the new amount until after that process is complete. And typically that process takes months. It almost never is going to take less than 2 months. Well, in fact, it absolutely will never take less than 2 months, because the end of the process is you have to have your association vote on it to adopt the amended bylaws, and they can only have that vote after you give them 30 days notice that it's coming. So, basically 2 months would be the absolute rock bottom minimum if everything works perfectly, and rarely is it going to work out like that. A more realistic estimate is, 3 to 4 months that it would take to amend your bylaws. So, we reminded all the units, last winter that, if they were thinking about raising their dues for the 2020-2021 year, that they should have started that like in January. And, a number of units did. But if yours didn't, then you can start a bylaws amendment, but it's going to take a long time, and you can't charge a new amount until that's completely finished with the process. The only exception to charging what it says in your bylaws is when higher level PTAs raise their share of the dues. You're allowed to pass those along. Now, no higher level have raised their dues effective for the next year. The last change in any higher level amounts was some of the councils changed their amounts a year ago. and that was a relatively modest change. You know, some councils went from 25 cents to 50 cents, and one council went from 75 cents down to 50 cents. So for the couple of councils that raised their dues a year ago, they were allowed to pass that along to, you know, the units in their council are allowed to pass that along to their members without amending the bylaws. But that's not really going to be anything that affects you, most likely, just because it's been a while. The time that it becomes important is when the national PTA raises their dues or the state PTA raises their dues, because those are typically a fairly significant portion of the dues, and the increase might be as well. You know, so sometimes it'll go up like $1, and then you can pass that along. But that hasn't happened in several years, so it's unlikely that will affect any of you right now. The unit's dues, the amount you charge. So if your bylaws say your dues are $8 or your dues are $10, whatever it is, regardless, doesn't matter. Not all of that money is yours. In fact, only a minority of that money is yours as a unit. The national portion of every membership is currently $2.25. State portion is $2. The district portion is $1.50, and the council portion is 50 cents. So if you add that up, that comes to $6.25. So for every member that you have, you need to pay $6.25 up the line through channels. That means you write out a check to your council periodically, passing along $6.25 for every member. So that's why it's especially problematic if your unit is still charging $6, because that means you have to pass along the entire amount plus an additional 25 cents for each member. Okay, so that's called remitting per capita membership money. You pay that to your council. And like I mentioned before, your council will keep their 50-cent share, and they'll pass the other $5.75 on to the district. The district keeps its share and passes on. So you're only paying money to the council. You're never paying per capita membership money directly to the district, state, or national. You're paying it all just to your council. Okay, whenever you make a remittance to council of membership money or any other money, you need to include 2 completed copies of the unit remittance form, because otherwise your council treasurer won't know what it is you're paying for. So it's very important, don't ever just send them a check without the paperwork. So this is an example of the unit remittance form. It's personalized for your particular council. So you should get one of these forms. You should get it in Excel from your council treasurer in July. Okay, so you don't necessarily use this one unless you happen to be in the Northwest Valley Council, because this form is actually the Northwest Valley Council's unit remittance form. Most of it will be similar, but what will be different is the fact that you should make your check payable to the Northwest Valley Council, and it lists who your council treasurer is and their address. So you will either mail it to them or you'll deliver it to them. Most council treasurers leave a plastic box on their porch marked PTA, and you can toss stuff in there. Certainly Northwest Valley Council does, because that box lived on my porch for 2 years, and now it lives on Gilma's porch. But your council treasurer will give you instructions about that. Yeah, Google Sheets is fine. Okay, so on this form, generally when you get it from your council treasurer, you'll personalize it. You'll put your unit name, your address, your state PTID number, which is on the cover of your bylaws, and then you'll fill out your information, your name as the treasurer, your telephone number, address, email address. You do that once, you save it on your computer, and then each time you make a remittance, you just use that personalized form, you change the pertinent details, and you save it under a different file name. You save it, remittance number 1, remittance number 2, remittance number 3, and then that way you have all of those files on your computer, and you don't have to go type in your name and address and stuff every time you remit the money. You only do that once. The only thing that you'll change each time you make a remittance is the highlighted fields, the date, the total number of memberships that you're remitting, and the check number. So it'll be very easy for you to do. On this form, when you put in the total number of memberships right there, like let's say you put in 100 memberships, this right here will automatically say $625. $625. So it will multiply the number of memberships times the $625 per member and fill that out for you. Okay, and then in addition to the memberships, there's also several other sums that you'll be paying to the council less frequently. Most of these are just once a year, and we'll talk about those in a bit. Okay. So besides the per capita membership money, there are several other things that get remitted to council. There's an annual insurance premium, which covers your liability insurance and your directors and officers insurance, which covers you in case somebody gets hurt at one of your events or anything like that. That amount changes typically from year to year. We don't know what the new amount is yet. $232 is what it was last year. In fact, $232 is also what it was 2 years ago. Last year was the first year in all the years I've been doing this stuff. So in the last 8 years, last year was the first year that it did not go up. I would imagine that it will go up this year, for the upcoming year. We should find out that amount probably around the end of July. So don't pay your annual insurance premium until after you find out what the new amount is going to be. Because 2 years ago, I know in the council, we did have a couple of units that were gung-ho and paid the insurance premium relatively early in July, and they paid the wrong amount. I think it was $229 the year before that, and then they wound up having to send us another check for $3 to make up the difference. So wait until you find out what the current insurance premium is going to be before you pay it. The insurance isn't due until like November anyway, so you got plenty of time. The annual district extension is $60. That's just a one-time fee that each unit will pay to the council. Well, they'll pay it through channels. So they'll pay it to the council, but the council will pass it on to the district. And then there's also a similar annual expense, the council operating expense, which is $40 for every unit, except units in the Valley West Council, which is $75 because they only have 10 units, so they need the additional revenue. So make sure you know which council you're in, and you'll pay that. Typically, you pay all three of those at the same time. That's the easiest way to do it. You can do it in one check on one remittance form. You just list each of the three things separately. So this would be $332. That's what it was last year. But we'll see what the annual insurance premium is. Maybe it'll be $335 total for the three things, but that's to be determined. A few of your units will have an excess workers' compensation premium, which is due in January, and we'll talk more about that at the appropriate time, but most units don't have to pay that. There's only probably about less than 10 units in the entire district that pay excess workers' compensation premium. The 31st District runs a music scholarship program. It's a fantastic program. It's been around for like 45 years. They give scholarships to deserving middle school and high school music students for taking private music lessons. The scholarships recently have been $300 a student, and we typically give out about a dozen of them. We ask all our units to consider a donation to the music scholarship program, and we appreciate that if you do. It's those donations that let us conduct that program. But if you do that, also paid through channels, it's included. As you can see, there's a space for the music scholarship donation on the unit remittance form, and you just pay it to the council, and the council will turn around and pay it to us. And then Founders Day free will donation is typically like February or March to celebrate the state PTA's birthday, and all of the PTA's birthday actually. And that's just a donation that the state PTA uses for scholarships. Okay, so we talked about the traditional memberships. That's when somebody joins either through cash or checks or PayPal or Square or something that you do independently as a unit. Separate and apart from that, we have the Totem, the electronic membership system, which is really a good system. It was set up about 2 years ago. The first year, it was, it was kind of slow going, getting people on it. Last year was a lot better, and we expect next year will be better still. There's a number of advantages to using Totem for your unit, and we'll talk about that now. There's no paper membership forms, there's no membership envelopes that you need to buy. The members get electronic membership cards, so you do not need to type or print paper membership cards anymore if you use Totem, which is fantastic, because having done that myself a few times in the past, those darn things never feed through the printer properly, so it always prints the stuff in the wrong place, and it's a real pain in the rear. So you avoid that completely. The Totem system automatically pays each level of PTA the correct per capita membership dues. Okay, that's done monthly. So you do not need to remit per capita membership amounts. You do not pay the $6.25 per member for members who join through Totem. Okay, that will be done automatically. Instead, Totem will pay the unit only its share of the dues directly into your bank account monthly around the 25th. So each month, automatically, you'll see in your bank account a deposit from Totem, which will be just your share of the membership for the Totem members. So for instance, if you charge $10, that means you keep $3.75 out of each member. So if you have 100 members join electronically through Totem, you'll get $375 deposited directly in your bank account, and you won't need to remit membership money to council for those members. Please, and that's very important. Please do not remit per capita membership for members who join in Totem. Each year we seem to have 1 or 2 or 3 units who do that, and then they say, "Oh, we need a refund. We accidentally paid you when we shouldn't have," and that just drives our bookkeeper bonkers. So try not to do that. You're only remitting the per capita dues for the memberships where you collected the money directly, cash checks, PayPal, whatever. If it came through Totem, it's already been done for you. So every single unit. Barbara, did you want to chime in here?
I do. Because of COVID-19 and because of the uncertainty, I can promise you parent groups are not going to be on campus next year. So we're not going to be able to run our traditional membership drives. You're not going to be able to hand out flyers or envelopes or anything like that. So it's really critical we get your units up and functioning on Totem so that you can run a successful membership drive. There'll be more on that throughout the summer, and we are here to support you every step of the way. You have a nice time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Barbara. Okay, so yes. So again, as I mentioned before, we still have about 15 units who are not yet set up on Totem, so you need to do that. And we'll talk about what you need to do that shortly. It's very simple. It's easy. We'll help you, but you really do need to get that done. It's up to the unit to decide how much to advertise or push Totem usage as opposed to traditional memberships. Although, as Barbara just explained, the virus has upended all of this. So, Totem is going to be pretty much the only game in town for most of your units. So that's why it's, even more critical than it was to get that going. Now, Totem is always optional for members. So members can always choose to pay the traditional way with a cash or check if they so choose. Now, even in the COVID world, in theory, members who want to write a check, are free to mail that to to you at the school or whatever. You'll pick that up periodically, although even that's difficult. And, so it's not totally impossible that a member could decide that they'd rather just mail you a check. But especially in the COVID world, that's really not going to be at all optimal. Use of Totem will certainly increase your memberships and ease your workload. That was true even pre-COVID, and it's even more true now. We already mentioned that you don't need to print paper membership cards. They will receive them electronically right on their phone. And that's what the electronic membership card looks like. That's mine, but it's right on their phone. It puts it, if you have an iPhone, it puts it right into your wallet. On an Android phone, I assume there's something similar to the wallet where it'll put that as well. And it's all done, automatically without any busy work on your part. Now, you can even enter the information of members who join traditionally into Totem, so they still get an electronic membership card. So if you're, as long as you're set up on Totem, even if somebody hands you $8 or whatever at an association meeting and says, yeah, I need a membership, you can still enter their information directly into Totem. You just log in as a leader, you put in their name and email address, which is the only information you need to enter, and then it will send them an email with a link that they can click on to download the membership card right to their phone. So even for the traditional members, you can 100% avoid any paper membership cards if you enter the information into Totem for the people who join. Yes, Totem does still charge a convenience fee. It's $1 per membership, and it's paid by the member, not paid by the unit. So there's no financial effect whatsoever to the unit of having people join versus on Totem, but there is a $1 per member fee that's charged to the member. So if your membership is $10 a member and they join through Totem, they would pay $11 a member. Totem keeps the dollar right off the top, and then of the $10, they divide it out to the different PTA levels. So that's why there's really no legitimate reason for a unit not to use Totem. It's much more secure than handling memberships traditionally. In the past, we've had some units you know, say, oh, I don't want to join, I don't want to be active on Totem because I have to enter my bank account information. You know, I have to enter the routing number and the bank account number into Totem, and that worries me. I'm afraid that they'll get hacked or something. That's a bunch of baloney. Their system is very secure. And more importantly, the only banking information that you need to enter into Totem is printed right on the bottom of each and every one of your checks. So every time you write a check and you hand it to somebody, you're disclosing that same exact routing number and account number that you enter into Totem. You're not, under any circumstances, giving Totem your login credentials for your bank account or anything like that. It's only the routing number and account number, which is taken right off the bottom of a check. You do not need to buy any software for Totem. It's a web-based system. It's all done right off the internet. There's no software. Okay, so this is what Totem looks like for the leaders. So this is what you would see, for instance, if you log in to Totem for your unit as the treasurer, and you can see this is me logged in for my unit, Granada Hills Charter High School. This was last year. So at the time when I took this screenshot, we had 262 online members. Those are people who joined online through Totem. And then 271 total active members. So that's because we had 9 members at the time who we entered manually into the system who paid us with a check or cash. Subsequently, you know, we had more members than that, and we entered them all. 100% of our members are entered into Totem. And then it gives you some information about, you know, where those members came from, and, you know, the breakdown of, you know, what, you know, why they're affiliated with, you know, your unit, that sort of thing. This is called your dashboard, and it lets you see exactly what's going on. And then these other menu choices on here let you print out reports and, you know, to see how many members you joined and when they joined, because you have to, you know, keep track of the money, you know, all of that sort of thing. So these are all of the leader type menu options that, you know, will let you access for your unit. And then these are this is the member menu. So this is for me personally. If I click on that, it shows my own memberships. You know, I'm a member not only of this unit, but I still joined my prior middle school PTA as well. And I've joined a couple other PTAs also. So all of that information would be shown on here. Settings is where, you know, you would, if you have to update your bank account information or anything like that, you can do that. Okay. So the question, there was a question, yeah, okay, I see it's already been answered. So if you manually enter people into Totem who paid you outside of Totem in order for them to get an electronic membership card, there is no fee at all for that service of any kind. They're not paying a fee, you're not paying a fee for that. The Totem also allows people to make a donation to your PTA. So at the time that they're, if they're signing themselves up electronically as a membership and they're going to charge the membership to their credit or debit card, it also asks them if they'd like to make a voluntary donation. And you can customize the language that is used for that request. So you can say what it's used for or anything like that. Totem does charge a 5% fee for donations that are made. Now, if you have, PayPal set up or Square or anything for accepting donations like off your website, as a lot of units do, you're paying a fee for that as well. Because none of that is free. The credit card companies charge fees for people who accept credit cards. So you're certainly paying a fee through PayPal if you're accepting donations or anything else that way. However, those fees are probably less than the 5% fee that Totem charges for donations. So if you want to really direct people to make donations not through Totem but through PayPal, if you have that set up, that's perfectly fine. It's smart, and there's no reason not to do that. Because the 5% fee for donations on Totem is kind of stiff, but the $1 convenience fee for memberships is really not super terrible, and again, that is paid by the member, not by you. Yeah, one other benefit to entering in all your information for your members on Totem, even if they didn't join through Totem, but you entered them manually, besides giving them the electronic membership card, Totem also, maintains a mailing list with everybody's email address, which can be used in two different ways. You can send out bulk emails to your entire membership through Totem. There is a small fee technically attached to that. You have to buy credits for sending out those bulk emails, but at least as of last year, they weren't actually debiting your credit, your account at all for that. So you could buy $10 worth of email credits, and then they weren't actually charging you when they sent out the email. So that was essentially free. Now, I don't know that that's going to continue necessarily, so I don't want you, I don't want you to think, oh, I can send out all these emails for free. It was free as of, this last year, and it may still be free, but I can't guarantee that. But even if they do start charging you the posted price for the emails, it's very low. It's not really a significant amount, and it is very convenient to be able to send out those bulk emails. The other use for giving Totem the email addresses for all your members, though, is they will automatically send out an email to everyone who's a member this year on July 1st. They'll send them all an email saying it's time to renew. And you will get a lot of renewals right on July 1st. People get that email, they click on the link, and they renew. So that is a good feature for you. To switch up, I believe that every individual member who joins electronically has the option of whether or not they want to automatically renew. I don't think you can disallow that if they choose to do it. But it is up to the individual member. They can certainly say, no, I don't want automatic renewal, and then that's perfectly acceptable. Last year, even for the people who had chosen automatic renewals, Totem did not do automatic renewals. Instead, they just sent an email reminding everybody that it was time to renew, and it required the people to affirmatively click on the link in order to renew. But I don't know whether that's going to be the case on this upcoming July 1st or not. So if your unit is not yet active on Totem, and that's only a small minority of the units, but if that's your unit, you need at least 3 leaders to create logins to the system. Okay, the way they do that is by clicking on a link in an email invitation that was sent out. Now, we'll be sending out new email invitations to your president, treasurer, and I think membership person, based as long as you submitted a roster. After you had your elections, if you submitted the roster as you were supposed to for your new officers, well, we get that information, and we should be sending out the Totem leader invitations. But you can certainly speed that process along by letting us know that you would like us to do that again. If you email us, you can email me, and I will take care of that for you. I can do that for every unit, for any unit who contacts me and says, yes, please send out a new totem leader invitation to myself and also our other officers, and I will be happy to do that for you. It's pretty easy for me to do. I just need you to tell me to do it. Once you receive that totem invitation, the leader needs to click on the link. They set up an account on Totem. It'll ask them to establish a username and pick a password, that kind of thing. It's very quick. It's very easy. It'll take 30 seconds to do. Once you have 3 leaders that have registered, then someone, usually the unit treasurer, so you all, need to add some data such as your membership dues amount. So remember, that needs to be the amount that's specified in your bylaws. So if that's $10, you type in 10. If it's $8, you type in 8, whatever your bylaws say. In addition, you also need to link your bank account. So you need to enter your bank account's routing and account number into Totem. Again, that's taken right off the bottom of your check. And then a different leader, which would usually be the president, has to verify the bank account information by entering the last 4 digits of the account number. So typically, treasurer, you enter the information, then you email or text your president and say, hey, Totem's going to send you an email asking you to verify the bank account. Here's the last 4 digits of the account number. Then that person logs into their Totem account, clicks on the link that says verify bank account. They type in the last 4 digits of the account number, and you're all done. Once all that information is entered, the vendor should activate your unit in 1 to 2 business days. You will receive an email letting you know that you're active. We'll receive an email letting you know that you're active as well. And then you'll be active. Once you're active on Totem, you get all kinds of ways that you can publicize that to your prospective members so that they can easily join. They will give you a Totem link, which you can just copy and paste into an email that you're sending out. You can copy and paste the link onto your website if you have a website. Your school can, put it on their website if they'll allow that. There's also a QR code which you can get right off of Totem as a leader, and then you can copy and paste that QR code into like a paper flyer or a poster if you're having some event. Like for instance, at Granada when we had, obviously this was pre-COVID, but when we had back to school night, we have a membership poster that we put on our booth at back to school night, and it's got the QR code on there, so people can just scan the QR code with their phone and it'll automatically take them to the right place to join our PTA using Totem. You can also share the Totem link on social media, so your Facebook page, your Instagram, your Twitter, whatever, and those are all good ways of getting the word out, so make it as easy as possible for people to join your PTA using Totem. If you need help, again, simply ask. You can ask me, you can ask Barbara, the district president, you can ask your council treasurer, your council president. All of us are happy to help you get set up on Totem and use Totem effectively to drive your membership. Totem itself also has help available, including online messaging and telephone support. So if you're having some sort of technical difficulty linking your bank account or something, you can get help directly from them. All right, moving on to a different topic, spending money. So we already talked about receiving money. Now we're going to talk about money going out of your unit. So the most important thing to keep in mind about spending money is it always must be properly authorized. And basically, there's only 2 ways that spending money can be properly authorized, except for the per capita membership money. You don't need any separate authorization to remit your $6.25 per capita membership up to your council treasurer. The reason for that is that money's not yours. That money was never yours. So when you sell a membership for $10, $375 of that is yours. $625 of that is not yours. It doesn't get reported on your taxes, and it can be remitted without separate authorization. But except for that one exception for the per capita membership money, every single bit of other money that you are spending in any way, anytime you're writing a check for anything other than the per capita membership, that money needs to be properly authorized. It can be authorized by the association, or it can be authorized by your board within certain limits. And those are the only two ways that expenditures can be authorized. You as a treasurer are not to write a check for any money that has not been properly authorized. So what are some possible examples of money that have not been properly authorized? When your president says, hey, I need you to write me a check because I've got blah, 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 the school wants money for this, we've got some expense, write me a check. Is that proper authorization because your president says, write me a check? No, your president has no authority to authorize spending of money by acting unilaterally, okay? If you're gonna donate money to that 31st District Music Scholarship Program that I talked about before, can you just unilaterally decide to write a check to your council treasurer for a 31st District music scholarship donation? No, you may not. That is just like any other expenditure, and it must be properly authorized by either the association or by the board within certain limits. If it hasn't been authorized in one of those two ways, you cannot write out a check. Now, what happens if you do anyway? If you write out a check that is not properly authorized, you can be held personally liable for returning that money to your association because you should have never done it in the first place. So don't do it, period. So any money that's spent by the PTA must, besides being properly authorized, must be for a proper PTA purpose, okay? So that means it has to be, in furtherance of your charitable purpose. So that means that even if your association votes to authorize spending money, it cannot do so for an improper purpose. If your association votes to, send your president, on vacation in Hawaii, even though the association may vote to do that, that is not a proper PTA purpose, and that is an invalid expenditure of PTA money, okay? So how exactly does the association authorize spending money? Well, that's a good question. It does that at an association meeting with the required minimum number of members present. That's your quorum, and again, that's set forth in your bylaws. So your bylaws will say that your quorum requirement for an association meeting is 14, 18, 12, whatever it says, that's what your quorum requirement is. It varies from unit to unit. So let's say that it says 14 is your quorum. That means you need to have 14 members present in an association meeting in order to take any action whatsoever, including authorizing expenditures. So assuming that you have the minimum number of association members present, somebody, typically the treasurer, will make a motion to authorize spending a certain amount of money for a certain purpose. So, for instance, I might raise my hand at the association meeting and say, I move to authorize spending up to $200 a year to provide hospitality, which is refreshments, at our association meetings for the year, okay? Then the president will ask for a second of that motion. There will be discussion of that motion if it's seconded, and then the president will call for a vote. All those in favor of spending up to $200 for the year, providing hospitality at our association meetings, say aye. And people will say aye. And then she'll say, all those opposed, say nay. And people may or may not say nay. People can abstain, not vote one way or the other, okay? If more than 50%, 50% plus one, vote in favor of the motion, it passes. The motion is adopted. You may now spend that money. So that motion that I made, if we had a quorum present, and let's say there were, 14 people present, that's a quorum, and 8 of them voted yay, and 6 of them voted nay. That means the motion passed. I am now authorized to write checks for up to $200 worth of hospitality expenses at our association meetings. Okay, so if the hospitality person gives me a receipt for $20 for buying cookies and water for our August association meeting, I can write them a check for that $20. And then next month, if they give me another receipt for $25, I can write them a check for that. And I keep track, and I make sure that I don't spend more than $200 over the course of the year. Now, if we get to the last meeting and we've already spent $195, and then the hospitality chair gives me a receipt for another 20 bucks, can I pay him 20 bucks? No. If we've already spent 195 and we voted out 200, there's only $5 left. I can write him a check for 5, but that's it. No more than that. So what do? Somebody would have to make a motion to authorize spending more money. So at that last meeting, maybe I'd say, I move to authorize spending an additional $25 for hospitality for our association meetings, because we spent a little more money than we thought, and we didn't vote out quite enough at our first meeting. And as long as there's a quorum present and a majority votes in favor of that, now I can write out that $20 check to the hospitality chair to cover that expense. That's perfectly fine. Now, if the association says, no, we think you've spent enough money on cookies and water, and a majority, does not vote in favor of the motion, that means there's only $5 left to spend on the hospitality for that last meeting. And that's it. So just buy $5 worth of stuff. Or if you buy more than $5 worth of stuff, thank you for your donation, but there'll be no reimbursement for you. Okay? Very important. You cannot write out a check for any expense that has not been properly authorized. So, as my example made clear, it's good practice, perfectly permissible, and encouraged that when you have these kinds of recurring expenses throughout the year, vote them all out at your first meeting in August. So hospitality for your meetings, whatever, ongoing type expenses, maybe you need to vote out, $25, $50 for office expenses, for the PTA. Vote out, what the things that you're going to have. Vote out $100 for government filing fees and postage for the required tax forms and other things that you're going to have to pay a filing fee for and postage for. Vote, try to make a list. You look back on what they did last year, and usually at my first meeting in August, I'll have a list of maybe a dozen spending motions, that I'll make. And then I keep track of that. I have a spreadsheet on my computer, on my desktop, for all of the motions that have been voted out. Every time I have a meeting, I go in there with a list of motions that I want to make. I make the motions. I take notes on the paper. Yes, it was approved. No, it wasn't approved. Maybe it was modified. Maybe I was going to make the motion for $100 and somebody says, I think $200 would be better, or I think $50 would be better. Whatever it actually winds up being, I keep track of that in my spreadsheet, and then every time I spend that money, I put that into my spreadsheet too. So if we voted out $200 for hospitality for the year for meetings, and then I reimburse somebody 20, and I reimburse somebody else 25, and as I go, I put that all into my spreadsheet so that I know how much money is left that was already authorized, so that I don't accidentally pay too much. Do not pay more money than was authorized. Okay. So let's say, you prepare your budget like you're supposed to, and the budget has to be adopted by the association. That's supposed to happen at your first association meeting of the fiscal year, which is usually in August. So I prepare a budget, and the budget says that, I expect that we're going to spend $200 on hospitality for our meetings for the year. So the budget has $200 for hospitality for meetings. And the budget is presented at that first meeting in August, and the association votes on the budget. So I make a motion that says, I move that we adopt the proposed budget for the upcoming year. And it's seconded, and there's a vote, discussion, and a vote, and then hopefully a majority of the people vote in favor of adopting the budget. And now we have an adopted budget that says that, you know, we plan to spend $200 on hospitality. Does that budget constitute authorization to spend money? No, it does not. It's crystal clear that the mere fact that an expense is included in the budget and that budget was adopted by the association, that is not authorization to spend the money. The only way that you can spend the money, the only way to get authorization to spend the money is for the association to specifically vote on a motion to authorize spending that money for a particular purpose, or if the board does that within certain limits, which we're going to talk about in a second. Okay, so don't think that just because it was in the budget and the association adopted the budget that you can now write out a bunch of checks. You cannot. That's not how it works. You need to make a motion at every meeting. So before every association meeting, as treasurer, you should look at the calendar for at least the next month and say, what expenses might we incur in the next month? And then make a list of motions that you're going to make, or that somebody's going to make, to authorize spending that money. And it's good practice to actually look out 2 months in the future, because you never really know if at your next association meeting, if you're going to have a quorum. So if you don't have a quorum, then you cannot take any action, including authorizing expenditures. So when you do have a quorum, if you try to look 2 months out in the future and vote out any expenses, you're going to have an event coming up and it's going to take some money, or you're going to, you're going to supply school supplies to the teachers, or whatever it is that your association, does. Vote all that money out well in advance, so that there's no surprises, because if it doesn't get voted out, you can't do it, or at the very least, you can't reimburse it. Now, if somebody wants to front the money and, buy a bunch of stuff on their credit card and then wait to get reimbursed until the next association meeting when there's a quorum present, that's fine, that's on them, but just they need to understand that if the association says no, they're not going to get reimbursed, okay? You cannot spend money unless it's properly authorized. So, it says on here that the board can properly authorize expenses as well as the association, subject to certain limits. Yes, that's true. So if you have your board meetings, some units have monthly board meetings in addition to their association meetings. Some units have board meetings less often than that. It depends. But if you have a board meeting, the board itself can vote to authorize expending money, but that is subject to certain limits. So first of all, of course, the board needs to have a quorum present, just like the association would need to have a quorum present. The quorum requirement is different for the board than it is for the association, because there's a lot less board members than there are association members, and that also is specified in your bylaws. So your bylaws may say that your board consists of 14 people, perhaps, and that a quorum is going to be 8 or 9 or whatever it says is fine. Maybe your board has 13 members and a quorum is defined as being 7. That means you need to have at least that many people present at your board meeting to conduct any business whatsoever. If you don't have a quorum, you can talk, you can discuss things, but you can't take any actions. You can't vote on any motions, you can't authorize anything. All you can do is chit-chat, basically, if you don't have a quorum present. Assuming you do have a quorum present, then you would make a motion, somebody would make a motion, just like the motion that I talked about at the association meeting. I move that we authorize spending up to $200 on, hospitality for board meetings, or whatever it is that you're going to make a motion for, okay? So you can do that, and then just like at the association meeting, you have a vote, and as long as a majority votes in favor, then that's fine. Then that expenditure is authorized, except there are monetary limits on what you can authorize as a board. And that depends on whether or not that item was included in a budget that's already been adopted by the association. So until you have your first association meeting, and you adopt your budget, there won't be an adopted budget at all. Okay, if there's no adopted budget at all, or for any expenses that are not included in an adopted budget, the board can only authorize up to a specific dollar amount for all items combined, and that amount is specified in your bylaws. Again, it varies from unit to unit, but it's typically $500, which isn't a whole lot of money. And it's cumulative. It's not $500 on one item. It's $500 on all unbudgeted expenses until your next association meeting. So when you have another association meeting and you present a report to the association that the board authorized certain expenditures, that resets the $500 limit. But, you know, so, and that's fine, but again, it's for all items combined. So if you have a board meeting during the summer, you know, in July, let's say, and you're voting on things, because there's no adopted budget yet, you cannot authorize a whole lot of expenditure unless your association released some money in April or May for the new board to authorize expenditures before the first association meeting. That's good recommended practice, and if you did that, then that's great. That frees up a bigger chunk of money that your board can authorize. But if you didn't do that, then you're limited to the amount specified in your bylaws, which is likely $500 for unbudgeted expenses, okay? And then after you have your first association meeting in August, and let's say that your association does in fact adopt a budget, okay? Now, for all future board meetings for the rest of the year, your board can authorize expenditures up to the budgeted amount for anything, regardless of what that amount is. So if you budgeted, you know, $1,500 to provide, you know, classroom supplies to the teachers, and that was adopted, you know, your budget was adopted, included $1,500 for classroom supplies for the teachers. Again, that doesn't authorize you writing out checks for that amount yet. Either the association or the board needs to authorize that, but that can be done by the board. So when you have a board meeting, you can make a motion. I move that we authorize spending up to $1,500 on classroom supplies for teachers. And because that was included in your budget, which was adopted by the association, the board is now authorized to, is now allowed to authorize that expenditure. So even though that's above the $500 limit, the $500 limit only applies to unbudgeted expenditures. For budgeted expenditures, the board is authorized, the board may authorize expenditures up to the full amount of the budgeted expenditure. So in this case, you vote out $1,500 as a board. Because that was included in the budget, you're good to go. You know, no problem at all. And in fact, the board could even authorize spending up to $2,000 on those classroom expenses, because $1,500 of that was budgeted and the other $500 would be an unbudgeted expense. And as long as your bylaws set that amount at $500, that would be perfectly permissible. Your board could authorize spending $2,000 even though the budget was $1,500, because the board has its inherent $500, we're saying, authority for unbudgeted expenses. But that would be it. If you did that, then that would use up the entirety of the board's ability to authorize unbudgeted expenses until after your next association meeting, and the board wouldn't be able to authorize any other unbudgeted expenses, although it could still authorize any other budgeted expense. So hopefully that's clear to everybody. But so the association can authorize spending any amount of money as long as it's for a permissible purpose. The board can authorize spending only the money up to the limits set forth in the budget, plus a cumulative total of that additional amount, whatever it says in your bylaws, but let's say $500, between association meetings. Okay? Once those expenditures have been authorized in that way, either by the association or permissibly by the board within the limits, you as treasurer write out checks to pay those bills. Okay? However, there's paperwork for that, just like there's paperwork for almost everything. So this is the payment authorization request for reimbursement form that has to be filled out basically every time you write a check. So there's two schools of thought on exactly how that process should work and who fills these out. Some treasurers fill them out themselves. That's what I do. Other treasurers say, if you want to get reimbursed or you want me to write you out a check, then you fill out the form. However you decide is perfectly fine. That's up to you. You can fill them out yourself, or you can require other people to fill them out. Totally acceptable, either way. Regardless, you still need to have a receipt. So the receipt for whatever it is that's being paid for gets attached to this payment authorization form, along with the name of who the check is being made out to, what it was for, and then a breakdown of the expenses. So for instance, if you're going to have a movie night and you need to buy supplies for that, you would say the expenditure was for movie night, and then you might say Smart and Final right here. You know, Smart and Final, you know, bought food for resale, $200. You know, Ralph's bought soda, $100. Whatever it is, you list those expenses, you add it up, you indicate that either the association authorized the expenditure and the activity, or the board authorized the expenditure. You put the check number. If you categorize it, you know, you would say like movie nights, or, you know, however you keep track of what the different expenses are for, the amount. This needs to be signed by the president. The president's signature is certifying that it's for a permissible purpose. It has to be signed by the secretary, which is certifying that it was properly authorized by either the board or the association, and that that authorization was, you know, set forth in the minutes for that meeting. And it says right here the date that it was in the minutes, you know, when that meeting was, that the association or the board authorized the expenditure. And then you write out the check. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, typically I will write out checks before I get the president's signature or the secretary's signature, because I keep my own record and I know that it was for, you know, that it was properly authorized by the board or the association. So the secretary's signature is really just ministerial, because I already know that it was properly authorized and I know that it was for a permissible purpose. So the president's signature is really just ministerial as well. So I will fill this out, staple the receipt to it, and then I bring it with me to the next association meeting, and then I have the president sign them all, and I have the secretary sign them all, and that's how I keep track of this. And then and somebody else has to sign the check anyway, because two people have to sign every check, so that would be me. And then usually I have the president sign the check as well when the president is signing the payment authorizations. So you can get signatures by counterpart is fine. So what you could do is you could scan or take a picture of the form and email it or text it or whatever to the other people who need to sign it. They could print it out and sign it, and then scan or take a picture of it and send it back to me. And then you would have a collected document that was signed by everybody that needed to sign it, even though they might be signing it on different pages. That's okay. Alternatively, you could still do it in the traditional way on the paper, and then you could just bring the paper over to the other check signers once in a while. So that's what I've been doing. So I still have these payment authorizations that sit on my desk, and then every so often I go over to the president's house, and I have a folder of the payment authorizations, and I have the checks in there as well, and I toss them on the doorstep, and then I go back to my car and I text them and I say, okay, they're on your doorstep. Obviously I arranged this in advance. He opens up the door, grabs the folder, brings it into his house, he signs the paperwork, he signs the checks, then he opens up his door, he tosses it back out onto his doorstep, he waves to me from the door, he closes the door, goes about his business, and then I go back up and I pick it up off his doorstep and bring it back home with me. Or sometimes, especially if there's a lot of stuff to sign, or if he's not home at the time, then I drop it off and then he signs it at his convenience later that day or the next day or whatever and drops it back on my house. Same procedure. He tosses it up on my doorstep, texts me and says, I just dropped him off. And then he goes back in his car. I open the door, I wave goodbye, and I pick him up, and it's, you know, it's all there. Electronic signatures, it kind of depends on exactly what's meant by electronic signatures. You know, copying and pasting an image of a signature into a document is not really, you know, considered appropriate because there's no way to verify, you know, that the person who purported to sign it actually knew anything about it or actually did review the document and sign it. So that's not a good way to electronically sign it. There are document signing services like DocuSign that in theory could be used. That would be permissible, but it's really more effort than is worth, you know, for this kind of stuff. And obviously that's not going to work on a check anyway. The check, it has to be physically signed on the check. So really the recommended procedure is what I described, to, you know, electronically transmit the image of the signed documents back and forth, which is fine, but not to, you know, try to copy and paste a signature into the document. That's really not a valid electronic signature. There is a form and a procedure set up if people need money in advance, but nowadays this is very rarely done anywhere. Basically, you know, let's say you're going to be having a movie night and the person who's going to be buying the supplies doesn't have a credit card or doesn't want to use their credit card and they want money in advance from the PTA. You can do that. You or they would fill out one of these forms. Let's say they say, I need $200 advance for buying supplies for the movie night. You fill this stuff out and write them a check for $200 made out to them. Then they go cash it, they buy the supplies, but then they have to settle this up afterwards. So then they have like 2 weeks. They have to supply you with the receipts, and then you would settle up this advance. So for instance, you know, if you gave them a $200 advance and they give you $210 worth of receipts, then you would pay them another $10 check because they went over a little bit. Or if they only spend $195, then they would return $195 worth of receipts plus $5 of the cash back to you, and you would, you know, fill out a second form, you know, settling this up. But that's really, you know, a lot of work. Much better procedure for spending money is for, you know, whoever's going to be buying the supplies for the movie night or whatnot to just put it on their personal credit card, go buy the stuff, charge it, submit the receipts to the treasurer, and then the treasurer just reimburses them whatever it is that they spent as shown on the receipts, long as it was not over what was authorized. And then that makes it much easier for everybody involved. Okay, but under no circumstances are you allowed to pay bills with cash. Okay, so that means that if you're at your movie night and you're selling hot dogs and business is booming and you're throwing all the revenue into the cash box and you run out of hot dog buns, so you know you're going to send somebody to Smart and Final to buy some more buns, you can't just take $20 bill out of the cash box and say, here, go buy it with this. Okay, that is not permissible. You can never, you know, do that. The proper procedure is you send somebody to Smart and Final. They use their own money to pay for the hot dog buns, whether that's cash, check, or credit card, and then they give you the receipt and you write them a check afterwards after filling out the payment authorization form, just like any other expenditure. That's how things are supposed to, that's how bills are supposed to be paid. Units may not have credit or debit cards. So you cannot get a credit or debit card in the unit's name to pay bills with. Okay, all checks have to be signed by 2 authorized check signers, and that wouldn't be possible if if you had credit or debit cards. The recording for this training and all the other trainings should be posted to the 31st District website probably sometime next week. So you'll be able to, if you need to leave early, you'll be able to finish watching. Or if anyone else wanted to attend and didn't have an opportunity to attend, you can tell them that they'll be able to watch those on demand whenever they want off of the 31st District website, starting hopefully sometime next week. Now, your bank may automatically send you an ATM card, which might be a debit card, when you add your, when you get added to the bank account as a signer. You should tell them not to do that, and if they do that, then that is not permissible. You should shred that debit card, and you can ask your bank for a deposit-only ATM card if you would like to do that. That's perfectly acceptable. You can deposit checks either through the ATM or using mobile deposit, where you take a picture of it on your phone, and that's not a problem. But if you want to deposit checks or even the cash in limited quantities through the ATM, that's acceptable. You ask your bank for a deposit-only ATM card, and they will give you one that will only work for making deposits. Of course, ATMs don't take change, so you would still have to deposit that inside the bank in order to be able to do that. Okay. As far as cash for making change, that's a good question. But the way that you do that is, if you're having an event where you're going to be selling things for cash, you're going to need to have some cash available to make change. So if you're moving night or whatever, that's fine. What you do is the proper way to do that is, first of all, you need to vote out the money for that. It needs to be authorized just like any other expenditure. So you can include that in your list of things to do at your first association meeting in August. You make a motion that says, I move to authorize, spending up to $200 to use for cash for change for events where we're selling things. Okay? And then once that's authorized, you write yourself a check for the amount of change that you're going to need for a particular event. So if you're having a movie night and you think you're going to need $100 in change or $200 in change or whatever it is that was authorized, you write yourself a check for that, take it to your bank, and they'll cash it for you. Since you're a signer on the account, they shouldn't charge you a fee for that. Certainly that's true for Bank of America, where most PTAs have their bank accounts. So you write yourself the check. It has to be signed by a second person, of course, like every check does. You take it to the bank, they will cash it for you, and then hand you the cash. And then you use that as your change fund for that event. You need to have a new change fund for each and every event. You cannot just keep petty cash or a permanent change fund in cash, okay? So for every event, you would write yourself that check, take it to the bank, cash it. Now you have your change. At the end of the event, you would deposit that money back into your account along with the proceeds from the event, and make sure that you note on the cash verification form that you're returning the cash for the change. So you can either have a separate cash verification form for that, say $200, or you could include it all on this one cash verification form with the proceeds, but you would specify on there, so where you have the grand total on the cash verification form, you'd say there was $1,200 grand total from the event, and then you would specify 200 of that was the return of the change fund, and 1,000 of that was actually revenue from the event, so that it gets properly accounted for as well. Because the $200 return of the change would not be counted as gross revenue like for your tax returns and the like, but the $1,000 of revenue, of course, would be. And then when you have your next movie night, same thing. You'd write out a new check for the amount that you need, and so you have a new change fund for each and every event where you need to do that. You can't carry it forward from one event to the next. But you would only need to make one motion for it. So as long as your motion is $200, for cash for change for events for the year, that would keep getting replenished. So when you return the money back to the bank account, that would free up money for you to write out another check again the next time you needed to do The question, direct deposits, transfers like Zelle, Cash App, Venmo, etc., payments supposed to be treated the same as paper cash. Well, that depends on exactly what you mean by treated the same. Obviously, they're not exactly the same since you don't have cash that you'd be depositing and that sort of thing. Also, you're only supposed to use methods that are meant for businesses. So Venmo is not a permissible way of receiving payments for the PTA. Venmo is a person-to-person transfer system. It's only supposed to be used between people who know each other, relatives and friends, that sort of thing. That is not authorized to be used for business purposes, and therefore it's not authorized to be used for PTA purposes. Zelle is, because that's offered through your bank, that is allowed for commercial purposes. So you could use that. Something like PayPal, is perfectly permissible, or Square is perfectly permissible to receive payments for PTA purposes. That's fine. You need to set those up properly so that, the PayPal account is actually linked. It's a separate PayPal account in the name of the association, and it would need to be separately audited and such. So if you have more specific questions about that, feel free to ask offline. You can send me an email or whatever, so we can give you specific information about that. But typically, your best bet is something like PayPal or Square if you want to be able to accept online payments, whether from a website or by taking credit cards, something like that. All right, moving along. Okay, bank statements. So every month, your bank will give you a bank statement. Some units, they'll get those mailed, paper bank statements in the mail. The trend, certainly for the last few years, is more and more that is done electronically now. So you will receive an email from the bank early in the month saying that the bank statement for the prior month is available, and then you log on to the bank account's website and you download the bank statement as a PDF. Either way is fine. A lot of times, if you want to still receive paper bank statements in the mail, there's a fee attached to that. So that's why a lot of PTAs have said, that's okay, I'll take care of it electronically, and that's perfectly permissible to do. That's what I do at Granada. So every month, when I get that email, I log on to the bank account, I download the PDF of the bank statement, and then I do two things with it. First of all, a non-check signer needs to review and sign the bank statement every month. That's a relatively new requirement by the insurance company, as is the next one that we'll talk about in a second as well. So in order to keep your insurance coverage, in place in case you're the victim of embezzlement, you need to have a non-check signer review the bank statement every month and sign it, saying that they did. So the way that I do that is I download that PDF of the bank statement, I email it to our designated reviewer, who is our auditor. An auditor is an excellent person to take on that role because that's kind of what they're doing anyway. And they also are not allowed to be a check signer. So it works out well to have your auditor review the bank statements. I email the bank statement to the auditor every month. I say, hi, Lisa, here you go. Here's the bank statement for last month. Have fun. And then they look at it. They're looking for irregularities like checks that are not signed by two people, checks that are made out to cash, unusual check pays or amounts, things of that nature. They can then print out, the first page or the last page, sign it, scan it back to me, and then that way, that's how we can maintain a signed copy of the bank statements that are signed. Were you trying to jump in here?
I am. Are electronic signatures allowed?
Well, that depends. Like I mentioned a little bit, there's a variety of things that might mean. So it depends on exactly what's meant by electronic signatures. Sometimes people refer to electronic signatures as, they copy and paste, they sign a white piece of paper, they take a picture of it or whatever, and then they copy and paste that image into a document. Like sometimes people do, they type out a Word document and then they have like a picture of their signature. That's not allowed. Because there's no way to link that signature with that particular document. Anybody could just copy and paste that signature into anything that they want. That's not really showing that the person whose signature that is actually reviewed and signed the document. So that is not acceptable. Printing out a copy of the document that needs to be signed, signing it, and then scanning it or taking a picture of it and sending it to the next person who needs to sign it, that is allowed because that is an actual signature. And the fact that the different people are signing not necessarily at the same time or even on the same physical piece of paper, that's acceptable because that's actually, each person did actually sign that document, denoting that they were agreeing with its contents. So if that's what's meant, that's acceptable. A third definition of electronic signatures is a service like DocuSign, which is a service that's offered usually for a fee, where you have to, establish an account with the service, and then you electronically tell them, I'm consenting to this, signature, and they certify basically that you signed it. That would be effective as well. There's actually laws in place to make DocuSigning, considered to be a legal signature. But for PTA purposes, it's highly unlikely that there's anything that would justify the hassle factor of doing that, as well as any, the expense that would be incurred in that as well. You can do it for free by, like I said, scanning or taking a picture of the document after you signed it and then sending it to the next person to sign it. They print it out, sign it, and scan it or take a picture of it back. That's much better, in my view, than something like DocuSign, although in theory you could use DocuSign. But again, that's a lot of work for everybody involved, and usually there'd be fees attached to that as well. Okay, so moving on. Okay, you also need to reconcile your bank account on a monthly basis. So hopefully you do that on your personal accounts as well. That involves taking the bank statement, reconciling that against your own accounting records, accounting for what checks have been cleared, what checks haven't been cleared, and making sure that, the bank is in agreement with your records as far as how much money there should be. You should be doing that on a monthly basis for sure, and that monthly reconciliation itself is also supposed to be reviewed and signed by a non-check signer every month, and that also is an insurance requirement from the insurance company. You need to keep the books. I see also that time is running a little tight. I'm going to try to pick up the pace here. I am nearing the end, but if you can bear with me for another 10 or 15 minutes, that'd be great. If not, the recording of this will be available on the website hopefully next week, and you can view the end of it at that time. You need to keep the unit's books. That's a system of keeping track of every receipt and disbursement of money. There's a variety of different ways of doing that. You should certainly tend to want to keep using whatever the system of your predecessor is, because there's a lot of value in maintaining continuity. But if your predecessor has a horrible system that's completely ineffective, then you might need to switch to a different system. It depends. Different units have different levels of revenue, have different levels of activity. So some units that don't have a lot of money coming in and out and don't have a lot of events going on can use a much simpler system of keeping track of the books than other units. So it really depends on what's needed for your unit. You can, and what I think is the best way, is use a computer program like Quicken or QuickBooks to keep your unit's books. The unit must own the program that you're using, because the idea is that it will get, the data will get passed on to your successor along with the program. So, you have continuity. That's usually the best way of doing it, because transactions can be easily categorized and reports can be easily generated so that you can keep track of, how did we do on that fundraiser and the like, and that's a simple way of doing it. Especially Quicken is inexpensive and easy to use. QuickBooks is a good program as well. It's probably overkill for most PTAs. It's meant for small businesses. It's more expensive and more complicated than Quicken, but could certainly be used if that's what you decide to do. For many units, just use an Excel spreadsheet that's handed down from treasurer to treasurer to keep track of the books. That's perfectly acceptable. Some units, in simple units, can even use a handwritten ledger, and that's okay as well in a simple unit, whatever works. Certainly, any electronic system that you use for keeping track of the books, Quicken, QuickBooks, or a spreadsheet, make sure that you're backing up the data frequently and storing the data either in the cloud or off premises, so that you don't wind up in a situation where your hard drive crashes and you've lost all of the data for the year, because that's going to make doing your taxes really difficult, and the IRS is not really keen on my computer crashed as an excuse for not being able to turn in timely tax returns. There's also another option as well, which is PTAEZ, which is an electronic accounting system that was put together by a vendor for the state PTA. So a lot of units use that for their accounting as well. You can, but you don't have to. There's a fee involved in that. It's an annual fee. It's not something that you purchase once. It's a subscription service. It's web-based. So that's an advantage, that you can access it. Your president can access it. Your treasurer can access it, from any computer that's on the internet. Versus, something like Quicken or QuickBooks is typically would be on your computer, the data. So, the treasurer, you would have it on your computer, so the president can't just tap in, to take a look. On PTAEZ, they can. The cost varies depending on your revenues. I believe the cheapest plan is $99 a year, I want to say, for units that are under 25,000, and then the most expensive would be, I think, like $239 or something for units that are over 200,000, which is very few units. And then for units that are in between, there's a couple of other cost ranges, maybe 139 or something like that for units that are around 50,000. In any event, if you're interested in that, there's more information about that on the PTA's, the state PTA website, capta.org. And I can also offline provide you with more information about that as well. Personally, I don't really like PTAEZ as an accounting solution very much. So, sorry to the state PTA, but I don't really find it all that user-friendly or all that good, having looked at it a couple of times. So that's me. But certainly you're entitled to, have your own opinion. And there are a number of units that do use PTAEZ for its accounting features. And, if you want to look into that, you can do that as well. Reporting and compliance. So you need to provide a treasurer's report at every association and board meeting showing the state of the unit's finances. You should provide at least one comparison of actual to budget during the course of the year that you prepare. There was a question, can we have access to an electronic copy of bylaws? So there's no database of bylaws that you can tap into. Each unit has their own bylaws, although their council and their district does have a paper copy of the bylaws as well. So the best way to get the electronic copy of your bylaws is from your predecessor, or the current president should have a copy of the bylaws in electronic form that they can email to you. So if you ask, your treasurer, your president, for the bylaws, they should be able to get that to you. If no one seems to be able or willing to find or provide you with a copy of the bylaws, then you can check with your council president, or you can check with your district president, and we can get you a copy of your bylaws from our records as well. All right, we already talked about the annual financial report, the annual raffle application and report, the mid-year and end-year audit. So your audits need to be done twice a year, covering the first half of the year, which is July 1st through December 31st, and that would typically be done in January, and then covering January 1st through June 30th, and that would typically be done in July. Hopefully you have an auditor. If you do, fantastic. If you don't, then hopefully you can find somebody else who can audit your books. Obviously needs to be somebody who wasn't involved in that. So it can't be, last year's treasurer can't, do your end of year audit because then they're auditing themselves. If you can't find anybody to do your audit, then contact your council treasurer and they can help you. Usually what that involves is they will set you up with another unit in the same situation, and you will each audit each other's books. Is the way to get the audits done if you can't find an auditor at your unit. So work with your council treasurer on that. Then there's also a workers' compensation annual payroll report, which has to be done at the beginning of every January, covering the prior calendar year, basically, and more information will be forthcoming about that at the appropriate time. This is a sample of what a treasurer's report might look like. Again, you're perfectly free to modify this in whatever way you see fit to present the information in a more useful way. But this is the kind of information that should be presented at every one of your meetings. Is showing an itemization of all of your income, which is basically on a deposit by deposit level breakdown. So it's not just saying we deposited $10,000 during the month. It's each and every deposit should be separately listed, showing what it was for, and the same thing with the expenses. Each and every check should be shown on here, including if you make a mistake writing out a check and you have to rip it up and start over again, you list the voided checks here too, because one of the things that I always look at when I'm attending an association meeting and I'm looking at the treasurer's report, I look and I make sure that every single check number is accounted for, because if there's any check number missing, I want to know why that is. So list the void checks, and then you avoid, getting that inquiry where somebody says why the check number is missing. And it shows the funds not belonging to the unit, which is that per capita membership amount that you've received but not yet transmitted up to council, as well as what your starting balance was in the bank account, and what the changes were, and what the ending balance was in the checking account. And it should list each account separately. So here, if there's a checking account and a savings account, it would list both. If you have additional accounts, it should list that as well. The annual financial report we talked about. Okay, raffles we talked about. Really don't want to spend more than about 30 seconds on this, but a raffle is an opportunity to win a prize by chance that costs money to enter. All of those elements need to be present in order for something to be a raffle. So that is different than an opportunity drawing, which is not a raffle. An opportunity drawing is if you just hand out a free, ticket to everybody who walks into your meeting, for instance, and then you're gonna, have a door prize, where somebody gets some small prize at the end. That's not a raffle because you're not charging any money to enter. As long as you provide an opportunity to everyone who attends, whether they're a member or not. If you limit it to your members, then it would be a raffle because membership costs money. But so as long as you give a ticket to everybody who walks in the door, that's not a raffle. You don't need to worry about any of this stuff. A game of skill is not a raffle. So if you have a carnival and you have to, people are flipping pennies into ashtrays or whatever, to win, prizes. Well, pennies was a bad example because assuming it's not their penny. But as long as it doesn't cost money to enter, no. In that case, it doesn't matter because, I'm sorry, it's a game of skill. So it's not by chance. And it's not, a silent auction is not a raffle because a silent auction doesn't involve an element of chance. Silent auction is just whoever's willing to bid the most at the end, they win. So that's not a raffle either. But if it's an opportunity to win a prize and there's an element of chance and it costs money to enter, that's a raffle. If you conduct a raffle, you must be very careful to follow all of the rules. This is actually a matter of California criminal law because the raffle rules are an exception to the ordinary prohibition against gambling. So if you don't follow all of the rules exactly right, failure to do so is a misdemeanor with criminal penalties attached. So the rules and forms are available there. I'm happy to take any questions offline about raffles, but make sure you have to register for a raffle if you're going to have a raffle. You have to actually receive your approval back from the California Attorney General's office before you not only conduct the raffle, but before you sell any raffle tickets. And it can take up to 2 months for approval, so you need to plan ahead and get that registration in, early. If you're planning on doing that, there's a $20 fee for a raffle registration. You also need to file the raffle report the next year, detailing what happened with your raffles, even if you never had any raffles. If you just registered for the raffle, you need to still file a report, and we talked about that. Also, very important thing to keep in mind is no more than 10% of the raffle's gross proceeds can be used for prizes or costs of the raffle. So what that means is that if you wind up selling $1,000 worth of raffle tickets, you can't spend more than $100 conducting the raffle, and that covers both costs, like buying raffle tickets, and prizes. So you can't go out there and buy, $300 worth of prizes if you only sell $1,000 worth of raffle tickets. That would be illegal. And because you don't know in advance how many raffle tickets you're going to sell, it's always better, whenever possible, to use donated prizes for raffles. So if somebody donates the prizes for the raffles, then you're not spending any money on prizes, and then you don't have to worry about that 10% rule. And specifically 50-50 raffles, which I know there are schools that still do, not the PTA, hopefully, maybe the theater department or the drama department, the band or whatever, but they're illegal. So under no circumstances can you conduct a 50-50 raffle. The only exception is for major league sports raffles. So that's why if you go to Dodger Stadium, you know that they do a 50-50 raffle at every home game. That's legal because they have enough lobbying clout to write a special exception for themselves into the law. Unfortunately, the PTA doesn't, and that exception does not apply to us, so there can be no 50-50 raffles. All right, Moving on, this is the raffle registration form. It's a very easy one-page form to fill out and submit if you're planning to do a raffle. This is the annual raffle report. It also is a very simple form to fill out, but you need to make sure that you do it. We already talked about the audits and getting them done twice a year. That's the audit checklist. Those are the kinds of things that the auditor is looking for. All of these forms were included in the handouts that I emailed to all of you in advance of this training. The audit report is what the auditor is going to fill out. These are the results of the audit, basically. Just a couple of very quick words on taxes. You need to do federal and state tax returns and an RRF-1 form, which is the California Attorney General's form, each and every year. Taxes are due for PTAs on November 15th for the fiscal year, because it's 4.5 months after the end of the fiscal year. So your outgoing treasurer should be the ones doing your taxes, but you need to confirm that with them. They may have a different view of that. If they don't do it, then you need to do it. Okay, there will be additional separate trainings on taxes, that will be coming up. You can get an automatic 6-month extension of time by filing a very simple one-page short IRS Form 8868. It takes literally like 30 seconds to do. And then that would extend your tax deadline from November 15th to May 15th. Okay? So for the taxes that are going to be due in November, you won't have to worry about that for quite some time. However, there are some units that still have not yet done their 2018-19 tax returns. Those were, well, some units just didn't do them because they're late. That's a problem. Obviously, if you're one of those units, you need to get that done ASAP. However, units that timely filed the IRS 8868 by last November 15th, that gave them until this May 15th, 2020. But because of the coronavirus, those tax deadlines were automatically extended again by the IRS until July 15th. So it is possible that your unit still has a 2018-19 fiscal year tax returns that are not due until July 15th. Okay, now that'll be, you know, 2 weeks after you take office. So you need to figure out if you're one of those units, you know, very quickly, because I'm going to do a Zoom training on 2018-19 taxes. I'm going to do that on June 17th in the evening, probably at 7 o'clock. There will be information going out about that very soon, hopefully. It'll work the same way as this. There'll be a, you know, Eventbrite registration thing where you register for that tax training. But only register for this June 17th tax training if your unit has not yet done its 2018-19 taxes, okay? Normally, tax training would be tax training, but there were some very significant changes to the Attorney General's RRF-1 forms and rules this year. So the 2019-20 taxes are going to be significantly different than the 2018-19 taxes with respect to the Attorney General side of things. The federal and state tax returns are the same, but the RRF-1 is different, including a brand new form for a lot of units, the CTTR1 form. So again, the takeaway from all this is find out ASAP if your unit filed their 2018-19 taxes already. If they did, great, fantastic. I will be having a training on 2019-20 taxes probably in mid-July. So if you want to get a jump on your 2019-20 taxes, you can attend my July training. I'll also have another training probably in October, which is when we would normally do tax training because they're due November 15th. So you don't need to necessarily worry about the 2019-20 taxes for a while. You don't need to attend the July training if you don't want to. That there will be training again in October for 2019-20. But if your unit still has not yet done the 2018-19 taxes, then you definitely want to attend my June 17th tax training because that will tell you everything you need to know about getting those done. This is the form for the extension. This is the new CTTR1 form. It used to be there's a very sharp dividing line in terms of complexity for units that have $50,000 or less of annual revenue and units that have $50,001 or more. If you're in the 50,000 or less range, your tax returns are very, very, very easy and very, very, very fast. It's basically just an electronic postcard that takes, you know, maybe 20 minutes to do both your federal and your state tax return, and honestly probably doesn't even take more than 10 minutes. And then your RRF-1 form to the Attorney General's office used to be very, very simple as well, so that if you were below 50,000 or less in revenue, you could do both tax returns and the RRF-1 in like 20 minutes. If you're above $50,000 in revenue, your taxes are considerably more complex. Still perfectly possible to do yourself. You know, attend the training, will help you. You can still get them done. You can hire a tax professional to prepare your taxes if you want. Your association would need to approve that, you know, the expenditure of the money, because it's fairly expensive. You should expect to spend probably in the neighborhood of close to $500 for that. Could be anywhere from like $350 to $600. If you're in that over $50,000 revenue range, that would be permissible as long as your association approves it. But it's really not necessary, you know, if you're willing to, you know, attend the training and put in a little effort. We can get you through it. I've done my own units tax returns many times for many years. But if you're in the 50,000 or below range, under no circumstances should you hire a tax professional, because they're so easy to do that it would be a complete waste of money. If you do hire a tax professional, you should be sure to pick a good one. Just hiring, you know, a CPA that does taxes is not enough. Most CPAs that do taxes do them for individuals or for businesses. Nonprofit tax returns are completely different. They use different forms, there's different rules, and, you know, they really are 100% different from individual and business returns. So if you hire somebody, you should be sure to get somebody who is experienced in doing nonprofit tax returns. The other thing that everybody needs to be aware of is with this new Attorney General rules is you need to, for the first time, track non-cash contributions. So if people donate goods to your unit, you need to separately account for that. So if somebody donates supplies, water, whatever, just keep track of those kinds of donations and what they're worth. You need to provide copies of certain documents to your council and district, 2 copies of each of these documents to your council, and they'll pass one on to the district. Your financial report, your budget, your audits, your raffle stuff, and your tax returns, you always need to give 2 copies of those to your council, except, even better, you can upload the documents to PTAEZ. This part of PTAEZ is free. You do not need to use the accounting software side of PTAEZ. You do not need to pay a fee in order to use the document archive system of PTAEZ. I am running out of time rapidly, so I can't talk about this much more now, but if you don't have access to the document upload of PTAEZ, you can email me and I can create that login information for you. You should be able to get it from your predecessor or your current president, but if not, email me and I will create a login information for you. Basically, you just you scan and upload any of these documents, or if you created them, you can upload like an Excel document or Word document as well. And you upload it to the PTAEZ system, and then that way it will be there for your successors in years to come. When they need it, it'll be there. We're definitely encourage everybody to upload their documents to PTAEZ. It's very easy, and it's much better than making multiple paper copies and trying to store them at the council. So this is what it looks like, but it's really very easy. Lastly, word on fake emails. There's a huge rise in fake emails. They look like they came from your unit president. They use your correct name, your president's correct name. They ask you to send money. Do not fall for that. Obviously, you can't be sending money just because you get this email that says to, always verify, call them up, find out what's going on, but don't be falling for this. Never send money or confidential information based on an email or text. Always verify that any purported communication is legitimate. Okay, resources to help you. We talked about the toolkit at the CAPTA.org. Me, your district treasurer, your council treasurer, we're here to help. We've run out of time. We've been taking the questions as we go, so hopefully everybody has had their questions answered. If you have any other questions, feel free to email them to me, and I will be happy to respond to that as well. But I thank you all for attending, and I'm being kicked out of here because Barbara's got a president's training starting in 6 minutes. Using the same Zoom account. But in any event, thank you all for attending, and I look forward to meeting some of you at future in-person events that hopefully we'll be able to have again at some point during the year. Thank you.